Okay, this thread is the thread that got Flint Dibble on Joe Rogan talking to Graham Hancock. Dibble did some threads about Hancock before. They didn't get the same level of attention. This is the one that I think really did it. And it's 50 tweets long. I researched a lot for this, and we're going to run through it, and I'm going to show you some issues it has. I'm just going to put some things in context. Anyway, this is the first tweet, and there's 50 of them. It gets good. Or bad. This is from November 13th, 2022. This is after Ancient Apocalypse comes out. It blows up. In his new Netflix documentary, Ancient Apocalypse, Graham Hancock has declared war on archaeologists. Okay. His rhetoric sows distrust in experts. I would argue that it just capitalizes on the distrust that's created by academia, but this is what he's arguing. And Atlantis conspiracy theories promote white supremacy. So if Graham Hancock, in a thread about Graham Hancock, who does talk about Atlantis conspiracy theories, and you assert Atlantis conspiracy theories promote white supremacy, I guess technically, if we're going to play this 4-year-old game, you didn't say he promoted white supremacy. It did this transitive property thing where X does Y and Y promotes Z. So somehow that means that X does not promote Z. I mean, there's real consequences for Graham because of this, and the way that he was presented, and it's not fair. So buckle up. It's time for an archaeology thread. Flint continues to deny that he said that Graham promoted white supremacy, and in the most technical terms, I guess he didn't. But I don't think it's an important distinction. You guys get to decide for yourself. I'm not going to tell you what to believe. When Flint gets called out on accusing Graham of white supremacy on the podcast, Joe seems to not understand that Flint is claiming what he actually said is not accusing Graham of promoting white supremacist ideas. As in, Joe thinks it's so obvious that what's being said in an article, not even this one, he said it multiple times. In another thread, he brought up promotion of eugenics. I'll show you that probably in the future. Joe doesn't get it because it is so obvious that it is essentially saying that Graham promotes white supremacy. But Flint still denies that he said this.
Why didn't you get the Guardian to put that right?
Well, I don't.
Did you actually say that, though?
I did not say that Graham reinforces white supremacist ideas. As I've said,
so this quote is not real?
They stripped the stories of Atlantis? Yes. And I think that that's an issue. So, Graham, you go around the world to megalithic sites, right?
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
In that clip, Flint immediately tries to deflect to Graham. He gives this ambiguous answer, but Joe presses him.
So the quote, reinforce white supremacist ideas, that's not yours.
No, that's not a quote. It's not in quotation.
Right, it was in the other article. That's what I'm getting
and
to.
Again,
they strip indigenous people of their rich...
To be honest, the way I read this, Graham kind of saved him here. I wish Joe had kept pressing him at this point, but clearly the second episode's come out. Things have been cleared up a little bit. Okay. So tweet 2. He's going to say what he's going to examine. Hancock's lack of evidence, how Hancock's narrative recycles 19th century ideas on Atlantis, and the rhetorical tools Hancock and similar conspiracies use. I mean, try to remember these. Whatever, man. I mean, I think less than half of the tweets in this thread addressed these 3 things, but that's my opinion, and I do not have a PhD. So I'm probably wrong. Tweet 3, why trust me? No idea. I'm just a dude who won't pay for a blue check mark, which he's now paid for. But this was a while ago. I get it. He decided he changed his mind, bought a blue check mark. Yeah, but like, it's still dumb that you were posturing that you weren't going to buy one. And then when you realized you could profit from it, you're like, oh yeah, okay, let's do it. But I am a real archaeologist. I've excavated at sites spanning tens of thousands of years of human history and prehistory. Trust my credentials or don't. I don't, but I'll present real evidence why this show is crap. See, what I see when I read that is like, I'll present real evidence why this show is crap. Okay, you're an archaeologist. You have your PhD. That means you're trained to do research and publish papers, and I get that. But this is actually really, really emblematic of the issue here, because he says, but I'll present real evidence why this show is crap. A show being crap is an opinion-based thing. Maybe I'm reading into this too deep, but I do believe that Flint thinks that because of his credentials, that his opinion should be weighted more in these types of things, regardless of the evidence. But real evidence why this show is crap. I didn't realize that a show being crap was a, scientific conclusion you could make, but whatever. Here's Flint. Okay. Tweet 4. The first lines of Ancient Apocalypse define Hancock's all-out assault upon real archaeology. I mean, he's the one with the rhetoric. This is very aggressive. And he doesn't stop sneering. It starts out real aggressive. It is total war against mainstream archaeologists, mainstream in quotes, archaeologists, so-called experts who are defensive, arrogant, and patronizing, and utterly confounded. Okay. Look, the thread, the first lines of Ancient Apocalypse are actually about other people attacking Graham, and in this case, specifically archaeologists. So the first lines of Ancient Apocalypse defines Hancock's all-out assault upon real archaeology, but what they actually are is this.
And take one.
How would you describe yourself?
How would I describe myself?
You've been described as a pseudo-archaeologist, someone who cherry-picks your data. Your books are read by millions, but dismissed by academics.
And again, this is emblematic to me. If these first lines are in an all-out assault on archaeology, then what Flint Dibble is saying is that any defense of himself in the face of the so-called experts, double quoted in this case, is seen as an all-out assault, as in he doesn't have the right to defend himself, or he wasn't referring to the actual first lines. There's another thing 2 minutes, 47 seconds in, which is not the first lines, but it's close enough that he might be talking about.
That automatically makes me enemy number one to archaeologists.
Why not just say, we don't know. This is a spectacular mystery, and leave it at that.
It's my job to offer an alternative point of view. Perhaps there's been a forgotten episode in human history, but perhaps the extremely defensive, arrogant, and patronizing attitude of mainstream academia.
And this is in the context of an episode with Michael Shermer that they did, a famous episode I probably listened to 5 times. And in this episode, Graham is arguing with Michael Shermer, who is not an archaeologist, and what they're discussing is a completely different thing. The problem with what Flint says here is that Graham in this section is talking about a geologist named Mark Defont, not an archaeologist. And I don't know why Graham does this. He doesn't stop sneering. It's total war against mainstream and then archaeologists out of quote. When he said mainstream, there might be another place where he says it, but this was mainstream academics. It's not about archaeologists specifically. So he could have just quoted him here and said mainstream academics, but instead he says mainstream archaeologists, not in quotes, and then comma, which implies that the rest of these things are all about archaeologists, which they're not. This one here, so-called experts, we're going to go into it in more detail later. It's about historians. It's specifically about historians. And he cites them not listening to archaeologists. So it's the opposite of about archaeologists. The utterly confounded one was about archaeologists reacting to Gunung Padang, but it's not really said in a negative way. It's said in a very neutral way in this case. Yeah, Hancock does take some shots at archaeologists in this, but that wasn't one of them. So tweet 5. Why is Hancock so aggressive against archaeologists? Apparently it's because my colleagues have been calling him a pseudo-archaeologist for decades. That hurts his feelings. It's just really rude and disappointing, frankly. I don't even know what I'm supposed to say about this because he's outwardly explaining that he doesn't have empathy or sympathy for Graham. I don't hate Flint. I don't want Flint to lose his job. I don't want any of that stuff. But this is just, it's cruel. I really, really don't like it. And that's all I can say. I don't know. What do you guys think? Tweet 6. Despite writing multiple books about archaeology and hosting a show on Netflix that is labeled a docu-series and covers archaeology, Graham Hancock says he is not an archaeologist. He calls himself a journalist who investigates human prehistory. Look, he's not an archaeologist, right? He didn't get trained to be an archaeologist. He doesn't do digs. He doesn't claim Ancient Apocalypse to be an archaeology show. This is Flint's personal editorializing. Archaeology is a field. It's a proper noun. I've talked about this type of thing before. It is one of the fields that covers human prehistory. It's not the only one, which is why archaeology is not the only science or field that Graham Hancock mentions. There's a lot of others. So it's not about archaeology. I get it. It covers archaeology, but that doesn't mean that it's archaeology, like big A, proper noun, like hasn't been a thing for more than 200 years, archaeology. It's not like just because something's old and human doesn't mean that only archaeology gets to talk about it. Like archaeology is Gollum personified, grabbing my precious. Like that's what this feels like to me. Archaeology doesn't have a monopoly over these topics, and Flint and others assuming this is archaeology are implying that archaeology does have this monopoly. Tweet 7. That's an odd claim. Journalists investigate events happening today. They interview living people. That is one type of journalist. They examine documents and accounts and reveal ongoing or recent events. That's one type of journalist. Prehistoric humans can't give interviews. It wasn't till historical times that humans left documents behind. I mean, seriously, guys, this is the angle we're taking. Interviews aren't a requirement of journalism. Neither is documents and first-person accounts. These things help and are often used, but they're not the only form of evidence. Even then, Graham does interview living people, archaeologists, scientists, geologists, independent researchers. He does examine documents, his documents being the publication of research, because he's not doing actual archaeology. He's never claimed to be doing actual archaeology. He is reporting on his findings. So when he interviews experts, right, because he does have archaeologists and geologists and independent researchers, he has all these different people he's interviewed, okay? Those people, they're the ones who he's interviewing because he's reporting on the findings, not them themselves. I understand archaeologists do that. They go and create the first person stuff, okay? But Graham, because he's reporting on the findings, that's his topic. He interviews experts. The documents that he researches are the papers. What are we doing here? This is Walter Isaacson, who somehow was able to write biographies of Benjamin Franklin and Albert Einstein, even though they weren't alive to give living interviews. This is Peter Hessler's Oracle Bones, which is a book about the history of ancient China, okay? Very ancient, up until the present. It's one of my favorite books on China, and it's by a journalist, just like Walter Isaacson. This is In Defense of Food. It's a history of eating forever in diets. Journalist. This is Bill Bryson. That's all. It's Bill Bryson, okay? The Uninhabitable Earth. This is a book by a journalist about the future. I don't know how a journalist manages to get interviews from the future, but I think it's probably about as hard as from dead people. But they're all journalists. All journalists. There's also Nathaniel Philbrick, Timothy Egan, and Brian Hicks. The point is that Flint is wrong about what a journalist is. All right? Tweet 8. Let's dig in. We're in tweet 8, but let's dig in now. The real reason for Graham Hancock's aggressive rhetoric against archaeologists and historians is because it sells. It's attention grabbing. It starts Twitter feuds. It fits with conspiracy thinking. It's also a sleight of hand that covers up his lack of evidence. This is all Flint's perception, right? It's presented as undeniable truth, and it mirrors his stance on other topics. And maybe he's right, or maybe Graham Hancock has committed his life to this topic and is actually passionate about it. And he doesn't like being blatantly mocked and disrespected, which is what has happened to him by you, Flint, and then other people that you know. And does this same logic apply to Flint? Flint uses aggressive rhetoric as well. This is aggressive rhetoric. He's doing it in this thread. It is attention grabbing. It does sell. Graham rarely uses Twitter. If you're not already blocked by Flint, looking at his Twitter profile would show you this seems to be a projection of Flint's own strategies. Does that mean that Flint is doing this to cover up his lack of evidence? Despite Flint being a full-time archaeologist, Flint's used this exposure to monetize his Twitter, despite saying that he's a guy that won't pay for a check mark. He got one. He also reignited his dormant Patreon. And there's nothing wrong with making money. It's fine. But don't attack other people for making money off of their passion. It's a good thing. It's good that all of us can do that. As for these two quotes right here, okay, let's look at the context. Graham is saying he is public enemy number one because he discusses the possibility of lost civilizations.
This idea is upsetting to the so-called experts, who insist that the only humans who existed during the Ice Age were simple hunter-gatherers.
That automatically makes me enemy number one to archaeologists.
And based on the inflammatory responses of archaeologists and even archaeological organizations that Flint is a part of and helps write, I'd say he's correct. This thread right here that we're reading from Flint is evidence of that. And we aren't even going to cover the articles that Flint has written about Graham in this video, but we're going to later, so subscribe. Or don't, I'm not your dad. The other quote is Graham describing being banned from Serpent Mound. It's a very clear example of censorship. You don't have to agree with it, but at least say what it is.
Because the presenter of this series, Graham Hancock, proposes a theory and story that do not align with what we know to be true about Serpent Mound, your request is declined.
You know, the what we know here comes across as extraordinarily anti-scientific to me. After he reveals he was barred from Serpent Mound, he brings up the idea of censorship by ridicule, and he brings receipts. Hancock's claim is there's a mysterious and advanced Ice Age civilization that spanned the globe.
In the Ice Age, how much taxes did people pay?
This lost civilization was destroyed in an apocalyptic flood. Its few survivors taught Stone Age humans the secrets of agriculture, architecture, and other advanced technologies. Tweet 9. So Flint brings up this advanced thing a lot. Like, he brings up this idea that Graham was claiming metallurgy, that he was claiming like industrial technology at certain points, he implies, because he still talks about this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you all the specific times that Graham talked about advanced and the specific cases where he was talking about advanced.
Whoever built Menidra had an extraordinarily advanced understanding of the cosmos, the work of a culture with advanced knowledge of astronomy and advanced architecturals. Now, these maps suggest that long before Magellan's famous expedition, an advanced culture did circumnavigate that Ice Age world. It's a highly sophisticated, highly advanced megalithic site that's about 7,000 years older than Stonehenge and about 7,000 years older than the Giza.
There were people in ancient Native America with advanced surveying, geometrical, and astronomical skills.
They were far, far, far more advanced in terms of scientific knowledge, knowledge of the Earth, knowledge of the universe than we're taught. And capable of astounding feats of engineering.
So understanding of astronomy, this is demonstrated in megalithic structures. Understanding of navigation, demonstrated in maps like the Peri Reis, pre-Columbus. You can evaluate that map yourself. Advanced geometric knowledge, demonstrated in those same megalithic structures. And a relative advanced, more advanced than we're taught, is what he says, on science, knowledge of the Earth, and the universe. That's all he said, and that's all he meant. Flint Dibble still won't give this up. He still brings it up. So tweet 10. Why isn't this civilization found in textbooks? It mostly vanished in the flood, leaving few traces behind. Humans have amnesia and forgot about it. Archaeologists refuse to investigate it because it threatens their theories. When you're describing how someone else thinks, it's a good idea to quote them directly or to be very careful about matching their wording. That's how I would take it. That's how I often do it. I often just include passages in what I do, unless you want to misrepresent them or make them sound stupid. And Flint is clearly capable of taking screenshots, even though so far I've already showed him to be claiming Graham said something he did not with the proper context. So why is he using an unrelated screenshot here? He says vanished. I can't find the word vanished anywhere in Ancient Apocalypse. I don't know why he's claiming Graham said this, but he didn't use that word in this series. Maybe he used another word. Vanished is the wrong word. It's just the wrong word. If there was a great flood, as indigenous myths across the world tell us, then it wouldn't vanish. It would possibly wash away a lot of evidence, maybe in the places where Graham specifically speaks about, specifically the Sahara and the Amazon, where we really do not have as good of coverage as Flint has claimed. It's not like it vanished like Cinderella's dress at midnight. Flint says humans have amnesia and forgot about it. The putting single words in quotes is really odd to me. It's just not what Graham said. He's using a metaphor, and Flint writes it as literal. This is what he says.
My suspicion is humans are a species with amnesia. We have forgotten something incredibly important in our own past.
Flint could have quoted Graham saying humans are a species with amnesia, which is only 33 characters, but Flint chooses to go with the longer and inaccurate retelling in 41 characters to make Graham sound more out there than he is. And archaeologists refuse to investigate. We'll revisit that one soon in this video when we talk about Gunung Padang. Tweet 11. Flint here associates Graham with QAnon, ancient aliens, as well as other paranormal beliefs. I used to laugh at this kind of argument because it's ridiculous if you know the evidence. Right. If only you knew what I knew. But more and more people believe in conspiracy theories today, whether they be the QAnon types, ancient aliens, or Atlantis, which Hancock thinks this Ice Age civilization is. I'm not really sure what a belief in an ancient civilization has to do with paranormal beliefs. It doesn't seem very paranormal to me, unless you're claiming it was aliens or something, but that's a separate thing. That's not what it says. This is kind of crazy based on the stuff on the list to me, but I guess Flint is just redefining what the word means along with Chapman University. Regardless, many of these beliefs are crucial to indigenous belief systems. On tweet 43, we are on 11, and many other times in tweets and articles, Flint says pseudo-archaeology, a label he has already placed on Graham, functions to steal credit from indigenous people. But Flint here is openly disrespecting indigenous people's belief systems. Spirits are central to many belief systems, especially animistic or shamanistic ones that are extremely common amongst hunter-gatherer groups. I'm not even going to name examples. They're nearly universal. This is not hard to look up. I already look up too many things. Aliens, beings from other planets, can be important to indigenous people. The Dogon people of Africa, namely. The Hopi and the Lakota as well, and many others on different continents. Here's an article from the Lakota Times. Lakota people do have knowledge of beings from other worlds visiting this earth. They write Bigfoot here, but Bigfoot is a name for Sasquatch, which is an anglicization of the word Saskets from the Pacific Northwest. Hawkemelem. I tried. Foreseeing the future is also common indigenous beliefs. So why does Flint get a pass on disrespecting indigenous belief systems? Why does he get to pick and choose when he listens to indigenous people and when he doesn't? Tweet 12. If you look closely, Hancock doesn't ever present any real evidence, just a range of negative evidence, endless possibilities and suppositions, untested claims, and many explanations for why there isn't evidence. We can walk through a few examples. Look, Graham does provide evidence. It might not be the kind that Flint likes. It might not be considered evidence in archaeology. It doesn't matter. He's not an archaeologist. He presents things, and people get to decide if they're evidence or not. He doesn't even claim it's true. You can get all mad at that. I'm just asking questions here, but someone's got to freaking do it, or we'd all still be believing in stuff they believed in 10,000 years ago if people like Flint were in charge. This is ridiculous. And it's not negative evidence. Maybe some of it is. I haven't found an example of that, but it's just not. Negative evidence is proving that something is unlikely based on the evidence that we have. That's not what Graham does. He talks about geological evidence, black mats, erosion. He talks about astronomical alignments a lot. That's probably his biggest thing, which archaeoastronomy is a real field, by the way, in archaeology. It's a heavily attacked subfield, but it's still a real field. The thing is that negative evidence is what Flint uses, and it's fine. Like, he attacks negative evidence like it's not good evidence, but if there's a lot of overwhelming evidence of other things that disproves that or makes it very unlikely that something else was possible, then that's a good argument. That's what negative evidence is. That's how Flint argued that Graham was wrong because we would have found these shipwrecks, or we would have found the things in all this crazy archaeology they've been doing in the Sahara that I guess I never knew about because it hasn't really happened at the level that Flint implied. And he was wrong about a lot of the maritime archaeology stuff, but that was still the argument he was going for, is negative evidence. That's what he used. Tweet 13. In the final episode, Hancock and Randall suggest the flood that ended this worldwide Ice Age civilization was caused by a comet impact that melted the glaciers. Why is there no crater? Because it landed in a glacier, proving the flooding and missing evidence. All right. I mean, this is so stupid. Number one, Okay, before we go into the better argument, why is it landing in a glacier weird at a time when like a quarter of the Earth is covered in ice? What's the problem here? And here, though, more importantly, Flint displays he doesn't understand Graham's argument and either didn't watch the entire episode or is willfully misrepresenting Graham's argument. If is crucial here, as Graham is only putting forth this idea. He's saying if the primary impacts, okay? Now, I'll show you why this is really obvious.
If the primary impacts at the beginning of the Younger Dryas were on ice caps, when the ice melts away, there's no crater left to see.
It would support Randall's theory that the sudden catastrophic flooding responsible for the Scatlands came not from that lake, but from the ice cap itself.
Absolutely, to make a rewrite of history as we know it.
Still, one impact alone couldn't have created all the black mat sites mapped out by Alan's research team.
Their discoveries led to a startling idea. Perhaps it wasn't one cosmic impact that left all these traces around the world, but many.
That's a good idea. That's an interesting idea. We're not going with that. We're thinking about the black mats instead. The black mats published by geologists. You can argue about their credentials. You can do whatever you want. But the freaking in a glacier thing, not his argument. He dismisses it. And he says, no, it's more likely that it was many of these smaller airburst meteor, the black mats that hold this evidence in layers, and geologists are arguing about it. Geoarchaeologists and geologists, okay? And that's what his argument is, which is, you can argue about that as well, and Flint chooses to just talk about the other one that Flint kind of dismisses here. And Flint doesn't talk about the black mat argument that he spends a lot more time talking about. That's really what that was about, man. I mean, this sucks.
To date, black mat sites have been found across North America, from California to Michigan to New Jersey, and from Belgium in Northern Europe to Syria in the Middle East. That's a lot of potential impact sites, all dated to around the same time, roughly 12,800 years ago.
Okay, quickest break I can possibly do. I really appreciate all the support. All I really ask is that you like and subscribe, and if you'd like to, hit the notification bell to get notified when I go live or post a new video. If you want to support the show monetarily, which is totally not necessary, but I really appreciate it, it's $2 a month on Patreon. That gets you early, unedited episodes. Sometimes they have extra content of 10 minutes, sometimes it's like 45 minutes. There's like 1 or 2 exclusive videos up there. I share my source lists for certain things on there, so you can easily reference them, and that'll be going up to $5, I think, next month. But you'll get grandfathered in at $2. So if you want to monetarily support the show, you can do it there. Or I also offer, and I recommend everyone do this, physical health is really, really important, and I find that it helps me to stay on my workout schedule a lot better, having a personal trainer. So we have Axios Fitness as the sponsor of the podcast. He does online personalized exercise plans for as low as $25 a month after an activation fee and consultation. I think it's really worth it. I'm somebody who has chronic injuries. It's really helped me out quite a bit with chronic pain. It's way better to have a community of guys that are all working towards the same goal. So the link to the Patreon and Axios Fitness are just below. Let's get back to Flint Dibble. All right, tweet 14. One of Hancock's favorite types of evidence comes from remote sensing, tools like metal detecting or ground penetrating radar that help archaeologists get a sense of what is underground or not visible. But these tools are not foolproof and need ground truthing. I mean, look, I don't know. I don't remember Flint. I don't remember Graham using a metal detector, but metal detectors are a lot less precise than GPR and LiDAR. They give you a lot less information. I don't know why you'd even bring up metal detecting. Maybe I forgot, someone correct me if he did, but like, this is not what Graham uses. So here, Flint is calling for ground truthing. This just means excavation. He wants the site excavated. These tools are not foolproof. They need excavation. They need ground truthing, which is why Graham asks about them being excavated. Usually when someone's trying to hide something or when they don't have a good argument, they don't want more things to be looked into.
I'm very intrigued by all these chambers. I so much wish you could get the archaeologists to actually excavate this site.
When we see these chambers, 3 chambers, it's just like we are mad.
But Graham here is saying, hey, why aren't the archaeologists excavating this? I want to know what's down there. What is happening right now? This is crazy. It's very convenient that Flint uses the excuse that the GPR data is not ground truth when Graham wants it to be, but it hasn't happened and is unlikely to because of the attacks on Ali Akbar that Flint participated in. And Ali Akbar had his paper retracted. Tweet 15. Think about it like this. You have a metal detector and decide to do some remote sensing. Nobody calls metal detecting remote sensing. You call it metal detecting. You walk across a field and pick up some magnetic signals. Do you automatically conclude that it's a hoard of treasure? No, why would you? And Graham doesn't either. He wants the excavation. He said it on the show before you even wrote this thread. You knew that he said it. Tweet 16. Same thing with ground penetrating radar. It pulses radar underground and measures the reflected signal. There can be lots of explanations for a reflected signal, and so archaeologists always ground truth their results by excavating a sample. I mean, dude, like the data you get from GPR is much more precise than from a metal detector. With a metal detector, you just dig it up. It doesn't go down very far. You can dig it up with a shovel immediately. You're metal detecting over the ground. You get a little beep. Some of the more advanced ones give you a little display. Most of them don't. You dig it up. You see what it is. Maybe it's a 1970s beer can. Maybe it's like a hoard of treasure. Okay, but it's not the same thing because it's different levels of data that you get from a metal detector versus GPR. As for always ground truthing, this is just a total coincidence. I was reading an archaeology paper that was published just a few days ago, and this is an example of a time when archaeologists, they found a site through a remote sensing tool, through LiDAR, and in the Yucatan Peninsula, through the jungle, they got all these readings, all these maps. They haven't even been there. They haven't ground truthed it, much less stood on the ground. But they are talking about how this is a place that has 30 to 50,000 people. It's from 800 AD. They have a lot of information just from this. You would never get this from a metal detector, but they have much more advanced data. This is all the data they have from LiDAR. Okay, you have these advanced maps that show beneath the ground, show these complexes. They've mapped them. They've done it for years. There's a lot of work that can be done without ground truthing. And I mean, this single example shows, because Flint Dibble says always, he says always ground truth their results by excavating a sample. If you say always, that means 100%. That's one example where it didn't happen. And it's a random one from 3 days ago. So I don't know what to tell you. That's just not true. Look, maybe I'm wrong about something I said here. I welcome the comments. If I got something wrong, let me know. I will correct and I will be better for it. Okay. And that's fine. You're allowed to make mistakes, but you can't, after being corrected, continue to make those mistakes. 17 is just him advertising himself. 18, in Hancock's presentation of GPR evidence, none have been ground truthed, no voids at Gunung Padang. He's basically picked up a confusing signal on a metal detector and made a multi-million-dollar Netflix show about how it must be Smaug's treasure from The Hobbit. Cool reference, still wrong. This is the type of data you get from GPR, not LiDAR. They're both types of remote sensing. So is metal detecting, but it's very different. It's just a beep that tells you there's metals. The more advanced ones maybe have a little bit, but these are more advanced tools. This is not a confusing symbol. This modeling here is not a confusing symbol on a metal detector. Okay? This is some geologist work that I can't understand, but I know metal detectors and I know that this is not what a metal detector gives you. This is way more complicated. I don't know what these colors mean, but they look important. And as far as I can tell from a quick Google, that's a void. And they talked about the void. That thing, this thing right here, that's a void.
Seismic tomography in particular has uncovered an intriguing spot deep inside the hill.
It has a seismic velocity about 200 meters per second.
Right. Which in layman's terms means what exactly?
That's a void.
A void, an empty space.
Empty.
And you can get a sense of the shape of that empty space?
Yes, as you see here, it's a rectangular.
Ali Akbar says there's a void. He's got letters behind his name. Better believe him. He's the expert. Tweet 19. If you're wondering why these sites haven't been excavated, they have. Hancock makes claims about some of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. Every single site he highlights has been intensely investigated. Archaeologists know a lot about them. That's really weird because 95% of Göbekli Tepe has not been excavated. Gunung Padang, the crucial Unit 4, that is the point of contention, has not been excavated. So whether or not these sites have been excavated, in the case of Gunung Padang, if it hasn't been excavated at Unit 4, you could have the entire rest of the site excavated and it wouldn't make a damn difference for a claim about Unit 4. It's only relevant to Unit 4. So just excavate it. I don't see what the issue is. I know it's a big job. It's got a lot of attention on it, man. The upside's got to be more than the downside here. Tweet 20. For the love of God. The most important argument that Hancock needs to prove to be right is that all of these famous monuments like Cholula or Poverty Point or Gigantea date to the Ice Age. He presents a wide variety of arguments based on negative evidence for why he must be right. I don't know what he's talking about with negative evidence. He doesn't make a single specific, as far as I can tell, claim about how Graham uses negative evidence. I don't know, man. He just doesn't do that. It's other stuff. It's mostly astronomical alignments. But I'm going to use this opportunity to discuss a site that Flint Dibble claimed dated to the Ice Age during the podcast. So Flint says that this is dated to the Ice Age, but if you go to the actual article that he claimed was dated to the Ice Age, it says submerged Stone Age hunting architecture. Okay, and Stone Age is more ambiguous. It doesn't have to be the Ice Age. It can also be the early Holocene, directly after the Ice Age. So it doesn't mean that. And if you go deeper in the article, what you find, if you go down to this section at the bottom, you can do this yourself if you want. I covered this more in another video. So one thing to be very clear here, neither artifacts or datable organic material was found in the immediate vicinity of the two dive locations. A small timber sample was retrieved from the Holocene sediments about 10 meters to the south of the structure. Okay, the sample was used for radiocarbon dating, resulting in a conventional radiocarbon date and then calibration 9886 plus or minus 36. Okay, we're looking at 9,900 years old dated radiocarbon. Okay, and there's a small timber sample. This is not in the context of human remains. The dating of the site as a possible Ice Age site is simply because there was no ice sheet or submersion of the site during that time period. So the actual dating of it comes back, and once again, no human artifacts or remains, none of that, just organic material. But since the stone wall is there, and the stone wall is thought to be human in origin from its orientation, that means that dating it still gives you the time. That's what they're saying, okay? And I'm not going to argue with the methodology, but I'm saying that there are no human artifacts found. That's what they say. That's what the paper says that he shared. The paper doesn't even claim that it's an Ice Age site. It says it's a possible Ice Age site. But Flint claimed it dated to the Ice Age, which is even further from the truth, when it doesn't date to that. They did another sample, also no human artifacts, up to 10,662 years ago, well after the Younger Dryas. They don't date to the Younger Dryas, the article says it.
But he does not have any direct dated evidence of this civilization.
Just for context here, how much older, no one knows. This screenshot, I don't know, I guess he just threw it in there for a screenshot to have. But he's talking not about a site, but about a myth, the Quetzalcoatl myth.
Archaeologists are right to say that there was no global cataclysm in that epoch that could have inspired the Quetzalcoatl myth. This misses the point. The tradition is certainly much older than the temple. How much older, no one knows.
Tweet 21. One of his most common arguments is archaeologists themselves have found new evidence showing occupation at some of these sites is older than previously thought. But in no case does this evidence match his argument. They almost all date thousands of years after the Ice Age. Graham's argument is not that they're finding stuff from the Ice Age, except when they do, which they do, and they publish, and Graham cites them. There are certain finds from the Ice Age in the series. His argument here, if I understand it, which I don't think it's that complex, is that there have been times when archaeologists have excavated a site and they found other stuff later. And then that changes the date of the site. That's all it is. Tweet 22. Hancock argues that archaeologists want to censor his argument. But then why are they publishing new dates for sites when they find them? That's how we make a scholarly name for ourselves. We come to a new conclusion and argue it with evidence. Like, once again, the context of the quote. They do practice censorship. I don't know where he gets this idea from. They want to censor his argument. Why are they publishing new dates for sites when they find them? Look, Graham doesn't say that they're doing this. He doesn't say that they're not publishing their new sites. The context of this is that he's not talking about archaeologists hiding their dates. He explains exactly what he means by censorship in the context of discussing how he was barred from filming at Serpent Mound, and he shows other examples of being ridiculed. He says specifically what he's talking about, and it's not about the thing that Flint is talking about.
What more effective way for archaeologists to censor and restrain and crush opposing views than to deny access to archaeological sites?
It's by no means the first time this has happened.
This, unfortunately, is systematic and consistent behavior amongst archaeologists. They do practice censorship. They practice censorship by ridiculing and insulting alternative ideas.
He showed examples on screen. He explained it in less than a minute. And it's completely unrelated to what Flint claimed.
You claim we're trying to hide the evidence, just like with Clovis First. We shut down all the alternative narratives. That's a conspiracy theory.
Hang on, tell me where I've claimed that you hide the evidence.
Tweet 23. In one hilarious example, at Darren Kuyu, Hancock accuses archaeologists of hiding their new dates. They publish them, but the signs on the site haven't been changed yet, so it's all a conspiracy theory of us hiding our research. He doesn't accuse archaeologists of hiding their dates. He doesn't accuse anyone of hiding anything. He says this about historians.
So the original theory, which many historians still cling to today, was that the tunnels beneath Derinkuyu.
He says that historians are clinging to an old theory proved wrong by excavation, which I assume is coming from archaeologists. I don't even know how Flint got this idea here. And Graham also says this.
We encounter this again and again on archaeological sites around the world. There's a big notice based on the received wisdom of archaeologists. And again, that notice is wrong, factually wrong, proved to be wrong by later excavations, and yet not changed.
He's not talking about archaeologists hiding dates. He's talking about other fields. He names historians. If anything, he's complaining people aren't listening to archaeologists and making a point about how current knowledge can be overturned. Graham also doesn't mention or imply a conspiracy theory at all. I don't know where this idea of it's all a conspiracy of us hiding our research. This is a massive leap. And Graham clarified this during the podcast as well, because this isn't the first time that Flint, or the last, that Flint has brought up conspiracy theories in regards to Graham.
Flint, I don't think there's an archaeological conspiracy against me. I don't imagine there's a conspiracy. I absolutely refute any suggestion that I have ever said that archaeology is involved in a conspiracy against me or is trying to suppress my work. What the fuck is the conspiracy theory? That archaeologists are conspiring against me, which I've never said or ever suggested.
Tweet 24. In fact, archaeologists know a whole lot about Ice Age archaeology around the world. Thousands of sites have been excavated, none of which he mentions. We have published typologies of artifacts, thousands upon thousands of pages of words, drawings, and photographs. Flint says from around the world here, but he only shows episode of Europe, which was much colder and less desirable land at the time. Regardless, it's not true that Graham does not mention Ice Age sites. He talks about several of them, and Graham here says thousands of sites have been excavated, none of which he mentions. It's just not true.
Tribes of hunter-gatherers thrived on Sunderland's abundant wildlife as far back as 45,000 years ago.
I think that whoever built Gunung Padang shared our planet with the hunter-gatherers who we know were also widely present.
Fossilized human footprints have been found in the New Mexican desert that date to 22,000 years ago, while our hunter-gatherer ancestors were busy surviving the Ice Age.
Is that enough? I mean, there's way more. He talks about a lot of Ice Age archaeology. I don't know if this is true about millions of stone tools and bones. He doesn't cite this one. I would be surprised if most of that evidence isn't in Europe. There's a lot of that. This is going to have to be in 2 parts because this is crazy long. I'm going to get this out in 2 parts. Subscribe and like the video for the next one. Let me know what you think.
I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed.